Ravelli. I'm the Vice President of Yardi Systems Canadian Operations. And I've been asked to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Greg Romundt. Greg is the President and Founder of the Asset Manager and Property Manager and Centurion Property REIT, or Apartment REIT, I apologize. He has been engaged in investments in residential real estate since 1997 and investments in financial markets since 1991. He has a real estate investment experience in Singapore, Britain, Australia, China, and Canada. And I thought I traveled. But Greg, you've outdone me. In 1991 to 1997, he worked for Citibank in Toronto, New York, and Singapore as a financial derivatives trader in investment rate derivatives, major and emerging currencies, and exotic derivatives as well. From 1997 to 2001, he worked for IAG Investments Group in Hong Kong, Britain, and Singapore as the head of emerging market derivatives and then as senior vice president and partner emerging markets. Greg was a group risk manager overseeing all of the firm's positions in emerging markets and was a member of the risk management committee. He graduated from the Richard Ivey School of Business at the University of Western Ontario with an honors BA in 1991. I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll start with just... Thanks very much. I'll just start with a little bit of an introduction of who we are. Today we're going to talk about lead tracking and conversion strategies for a portfolio. Centurion, which I run, is an Ontario-based apartment-only real estate investment trust, 22 buildings, about 1,418 suites. And we began lead and conversion tracking about 3.5 years ago, using our own in-house developed tracking systems. So a couple of goals of this session. I'd like you first to understand what are the benefits of your data tracking or having an established system. Give you some tips and tricks to maximize your probability of success. And I'm going to pull out lots of interesting charts and statistics so you can see what I'm talking about. And then we're going to develop a very simple system for tracking leads and conversions. So what are the benefits of having a good lead and conversion tracking system? Well, in all the presentations I've seen earlier today, the focus has been on generating leads and traffic. Well, you can generate all the leads and traffic in the world, but if you don't know where they're coming from and you don't do anything with them, you've wasted your money. So part of our goals, and certainly our goals when we set up our own systems, were first to significantly decrease our costs, to significantly increase the traffic to our buildings, and as a result generate more applications to rent, which as a result means you have better selection of tenants, lower bad debts, more demand for your units, which equals higher rents and total higher revenues, and lower overall vacancies, thus higher total revenues. This is what we did. So over the course of, I guess it was 15 months, we were able to cut our cost per lead by 95%. So if you can see from our starting point, I've used an index to normalize it to 100. See where we started, or our starting point, where we had a combination of web and print strategies. We began a lead tracking system, which I'll show you a little bit later in simple form, and what happened as we implemented the various stages. So we found out what wasn't working, eliminated it, found what was working, and increased it. So you can see at point 1, starting point, then we moved to the second point, which was, guess what? Cut out the print web, or print, and increased web. So we continue to see further decreases in overall costs as we improved our allocations in the third point. So at this point, we'd already found what worked. Then we started tweaking and playing with the systems and improved the allocation. So we continued to cut off what wasn't working. So we really went from a shotgun approach where we had a lot of different sources feeding in, then continued to trim down, trim down, trim down, trim down. You can see then we kind of stabilized out, and then we started experimenting and playing with the system. And this is something we're always looking to do in our organization, is looking for new things. We trial them, they don't work, cut them out, move on. So acquisition cost per lead doesn't mean much if you can't do the same thing for your leases. And this is exactly the same pattern that we saw. So this gives you a very, and in this case, it was also about 94% total cut in cost per lead acquisition or lease acquisition. So this was a very significant number. In an organization for us, it ended up being a very, very large number that we were able to significantly trim from our budgets. So, and you can see the same points that I've illustrated that we saw in the earlier graph, and it followed exactly the same pattern. So, what are our lead tricks and tips? Number one, this is absolutely nothing less than a numbers game. You have to make it work for you. And as I've said earlier, generating all the leads in the world won't do anything for you unless you can convert those leads into application and into leases. So you want to target your highest, best quality tenants in the most cost-efficient way. So how do you do that? Well, first, know who your clients potentially are. How do they contact you? When do they contact you? Which leads are good quality and which leads are bad quality. And with a little bit of data analysis, and I'm going to show you that, you can find that out and target appropriately. So as I said, renting is a numbers game. So I'm going to take you through an idealized example. So we've separated our lease process into about 6 stages, which we monitor each stage and our success ratios in each independently. So the first is you want to get the call. Now I'm going to assume that you're going to get the call every single time. So we're not going to play with that number right now. Okay, so that assumes you're going to generate your leads. Now it's up to what do you do with it. So let's assume that your probability of getting a call is 100%. So I've got 2 columns here. The one on the left is the probability of that event occurring. And the second column is your cumulative probability. So as we continue to move through the stages, that lead funnel continues to get winnowed out. People are getting thrown to the side and moved out of the process. So we'll start at step 1. You're getting your calls. Your probability is 100%. Well, let's say that you have a success ratio of 75%. Well, now your cumulative probability is 75. Well, let's say only 75% of people who make appointments show up. So now you're down to 56%. Let's say a quarter make applications. Now you're down to 14%. 80% are approved, which is kind of where we are the numbers we see, and you're down to about 11%. If 95% of those people move in, you're down to 10.7% of all the leads that you generate become potential leases. So this means you need 9.36 calls for a single lease. So it's a little bit of a surprising number, but what's more of a surprise is what happens when we start tinkering around with these numbers. And so we can start focusing on what aspects of your business you need to focus in on to maximize the number of leases that you're going to write. So let's take 2 scenarios. So the first scenario is the one I went through before, which is kind of an idealized situation. Well, let's go to scenario 2. Assume you still get the call, and you make and your probability of an appointment goes down, let's say, from 75 to 50%. And let's just play with that number alone. So the number of leads that you require to close a lease jumps from 9.3 to 14. So very significant jump from just a very small change in your ratio. So the first thing that we pull out of this number is you got to make sure that every time you get a lead that's a good quality one, you want to respond to it. And that means pick up the phone. And that's the number one thing that causes failure in any lead generation and conversion system is failure to pick up the phone. So scenario 3, we're gonna hit it even harder and say, let's now assume you've got a superintendent who's manning your buildings who doesn't pick up the phone or picks up the phone half of the time. And we have that same lazy superintendent he's a poor renter, he's only gonna make 50% of the appointments. Well, even assuming that he's a half-decent renter, the same kind of statistics as all the other scenarios, you've now dropped to a cumulative probability of 3.5%. In other words, you need 28 leads to drop into your system to get a single lease. So we've gone up from an idealized situation of 9 to 28. So if there's any tip I could give you, it would be you can focus all you want on generating leads, and you can triple them or double them or do whatever. But if you don't do anything with them, you've just wasted all your money and all of your effort. So you got to know your clients when they call. Here are our statistics on when clients call. So you'll see something now. The off-lier off to the left, those are outliers. But otherwise, the vast bulk of your calls come between the hours of 9 o'clock and 5. So those of you who are stressing about having to answer emails and phone calls, and that's what when we first set it up, I used to get concerned about emails coming in at 9 at night, and when did you have to reply to them? They come in on weekends, we cared. Now we don't. And you'll see why. So you'll notice, as was mentioned in an earlier conference, a good chunk of your calls are coming during the prime hours. When, guess where people are? They're at work. We'll see that here again. One of the, myths in this business is there's a traffic that occurs at certain times of the month. Here's the statistics on days of the month effects. And you notice it's fairly consistent across days of the month. So in other words, this means you can't just focus in the first week or the last week of the month. You have to be on your game all of the time. There's no time to relax. Well, there are, but we'll get to that. How far in advance are people calling? So, should you focus on, putting up your ads a week before they're due, 2 weeks before they're due, 3 weeks before you're due? Well, in this case, we have something like 90% of all leads are looking inside the span of 60 days. But on the other side, how many people are looking for your last minute? Well, you can see it's around 10% are looking for a week or less. So the vast majority of your tenants are looking inside the span of 2 weeks to 2 months out. And that's where you have to be focused on. And you probably don't want to be focused on those people who need an apartment now, and we all know the reason why. So what days of the week are your clients calling? This was something we spent a lot of time on. We operated at one stage 7 days a week on a call center basis. And we found that there was distinct patterns to when people wanted to call. So as Tuesdays are our best days, the traffic really starts to ramp up from the Saturday, Sunday, and then declines back into the weekend. But there's something that this doesn't really tell you the full story. The full story is when are people what is the quality of those calls by the day of the week? And this is the most shocking statistic that we had. This is conversion ratios by day of week. So you'll see that Mondays through Fridays, very, very stable, high rates of conversion. So in other words, people are calling on a Monday or a Wednesday, very, very likely they're going to make an appointment. For people who are calling on Saturdays and Sundays, and this was just a little bit of scuttlebutt that always went around, was a couple of property managers we used to discuss the advantages of taking appointments on weekends or advertising, spending money on advertisements over the weekend, and this is what we found. In fact, ads on weekends or phone calls received on weekends convert at 1/3 the rate of phone calls or emails that you get that come during the week. So that gives you an idea of when you should be staffing your offices to be taking phone calls. Now, what kind of gross lead conversion ratios should you be focusing on? Well, in this case, we have about 75% of all our leads get converted directly into appointments. The balance we have a very small proportion of no's. About 3% are no's. A very small amount is we need to follow up with them, or they get waitlisted, or we can't contact them. So you want to the whole point of this slide is to demonstrate that when a lead comes, you want to make use of them. Again, because if you're not managing your process, then a great deal of the money that you're going to spend is going to go to waste.